Welcome to today's episode of our Dollars and Cents podcast. If you are listening to the Dollars and Cents podcast for the first time, it's a show where we get people to discuss some of the most interesting finance topics. And for today's episode, we are filming at a bookstore within a bank branch. We are at Wisma Atria and opened in November 2022. This is OCBC's largest integrated lifestyle and banking branch. It's not a usual bank branch because besides the banking services that you can expect in any bank branch, it also has a bookstore, a cafe, an omakase restaurant, and even artwork on display that you can buy if you liked. And our topic today is the evolution of bank branches in Singapore. And I can't think of a better place and a better person to discuss this topic with me than Dinesh from our editorial team. Dinesh, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here again. I was here the first time round and I'm wearing a different t-shirt so everyone knows that it's a different day.
Yeah, we're filming at a different day. So anyway, my first question to you is, what's your first impression when you saw OCBC Wisma Atria the first time you were here?
I think I had heard about it and read about it, but it's never like coming to it, right? So when I came here, I didn't know when the cafe stopped, when the bookstore started. There's even a gift shop, and then there's a bank branch behind it. So I didn't know where all of them started and stopped, which I think is pretty much the point of it.
For those of you who don't know, OCBC is Singapore's oldest local bank, and it was established in 1932, and today it's one of the biggest banks in Southeast Asia. But banking in Singapore started even before that in the 1800s. So just some historical context here. Singapore, as most of us would know, was founded in 1819 by Sir Stamford Raffles. So that was when Singapore was founded. And in 1840, so 1840, the Union Bank of Calcutta became the first bank to establish a presence in Singapore. So it's known as, the first bank in Singapore was a overseas bank, right? And today it forms part of the State Bank of India, and other foreign banks that also started, in the 1800s include HSBC, Standard Chartered, and then Citibank started a little bit later in 1902. So these were foreign banks that started in Singapore in the 1800s.
Yeah. And then obviously we come to like the first Singapore or first local bank that was started. I think it's commonly accepted, at least online from what I read, right? So this is the Kwong Yik Bank, founded by Cantonese businessman in 1903.
Right.
Unfortunately, it didn't have a very long presence. It went out of business following a bank run in 1913, so about 10 years later. And I found out an interesting piece of trivia as well online when I was reading about this bank. So it was first established on this street that I've never heard of. It's called Kling Street.
Kling. How do you spell that?
K-L-I-N-G.
K-L-I-N-G, okay.
Yeah, so this street, you've never heard about it, but
I'm sure I know where is it.
Yeah,
where is
coming
it?
to that. So it was later renamed to Chulia Street in 1922.
All right, that's...
Right. I'll leave the reasons why it was renamed up to your imagination though.
Okay, well, I'm thinking why. So it's actually Chulia Street, but it was called Kling
Street before that. Yeah, in 1922, they changed the name. Right, and we were talking about like local banks, right? So I also did a little bit more history, going on again the history trail. So I found an interesting article this time on the NLB website and roots.gov.sg. I think we'll link some of this in the notes if we can, so you guys can also head there and do a bit more reading. But even, you said the first bank in Singapore was in 1840, but there was financing activities already going on before that.
Right,
even before that.
Just
right?
that they were not banks.
Yeah, they were not like classified as banks.
Okay.
Right? So the Indians, or more specifically the South Indian Chettiars, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly as well because I don't know the proper pronunciation. So they were the first financiers in Singapore, involved in money lending business as early as, the modern founding of Singapore in the 1820s, right? So
did they settle here? I'm just wondering.
Correct. So this is like the British Empire time, when Raffles founded in 1819. So they were here like pretty much right after that in the 1820s. Right. So a little bit of trivia again, most of them established their business along Market Street and Chulia Street, right? Or what we know today as Chulia Street, because it was only renamed in 1922. And this was at the mouth of the Singapore River. I think you will bring up some like interesting facts about that as well later on. But this actually put them in close proximity to the trading houses, the government officers, their clients, other small businesses, the hawkers and plantation owners, right? And these money lending businesses, they were considered like the major players in Singapore banking and finance landscape all the way up till the early 20th century, right? So this is early 1900s, right? And then, stricter government policies came in concerning money lending, and, at the same time, the growth of Singapore banking sector became a priority. So this combination of the factors, meant that, money lending businesses, right, kind of went out of favor a little bit. So by 1981, there were only 7 registered.
1881.
1981.
1981.
Yeah. So these guys like existed all the way from 1820s all the way up to 1981. There were only 7 registered Chetia money lending firms still in operation. I don't know whether they're still around today, but as far back as 1981, there were only 7 already, right? So I guess what all these days, the while banking in Singapore hasn't been like around for very long, at least when compared to other countries, but from what we see, there's been ups and downs, mergers and acquisitions have always been part of the process, and even since the early days, right? And not just in the last 20 or 30 years when we consolidated to what you say in your introduction, the 3 main local banks.
Wow, that's a lot. That's one for the history books for sure. Banking has been here for a really long time, and if you just talk about local banks in Singapore, OCBC themselves were started in 1932, but actually it was started by 3 companies, right? So the 3 companies is the Chinese Commercial Bank, the Ho Hong Bank, and these 2 banks were actually founded by the same person, Mr. Lim Peng Xiang, and then the Overseas Chinese Bank, right? So the 3 of them actually merged together. We discussed it in the previous episode. They merged together, and then they started in OCBC in 1932.
Yeah,
and that's how OCBC started, right? And I still remember the first time. And this is not the first time, but the first time I remember walking into bank branches when I was young, and I used to go with my mom. I'm not so sure why we go there quite often. I think maybe, sometimes she feels like I think back then it's like if you want to transfer money to someone or you want to deposit a check, I think sometimes she just feels a bit more secure, banking in the check with the cashier, even though I believe that
settlement service was already available.
It was probably there, but maybe if you want the money to be credited to a specific account, then you have to at least specify which one.
I think the interesting thing is that, many of us, at least in Singapore, right, we start our relationship with banks from a quite early age. So like yours was probably in the 90s, early 1990s probably. But even today, I brought my son to a bank account, an OCBC bank account, bank branch, nearer my home, not this branch. So not as nice, but obviously got the job done. So I brought him there, opened a child's bank account for him. So I think his relationship now starts with OCBC from a very young age, and then one day he will be telling the story like this probably.
Yeah. Hopefully he will be, and he remembers it. So just want to talk a little bit about the early days of banking in Singapore. This is the 1900s, and as what you mentioned, the Singapore River was actually a pretty important place for banking, actually, right? So Singapore banks were historically located near the Singapore River because it was then seen, and still is today, the center of commerce and trade during the colonial era, right? And the early developments of the city-state was typically centered around the Singapore River. So that's where the trades, the merchants, they will be there with their boats, obviously. And the river was a major hub for the shipping, trading, goods exchange, and that was Singapore's economy in the 1800s. Do you know where's the first OCBC, where they started in 1932? Where was the office?
Right. I mean, if I had to guess, it must be like along Market Street or Chulia Street as well.
Yeah, it was there. It's the same building that you see today. Back then, it was known as the China Building on Chulia Street, overlooking obviously the Singapore River. Do you know what's the address of OCBC today though?
Address, I don't know, 1 Chulia Street?
No, 65 Chulia Street. And I always wondered why they had the number 65.
Okay.
Yeah, because Singapore independence obviously 1965, and our phone numbers, right? If you call overseas, you have to put a 65. So I don't know whether it's coincidental or not, but yes, it was the same building when OCBC started.
Right.
It's at where we now know today as 65 Chulia Street.
Okay.
Right. So the other thing to note is that the early days of banking, so this applies for OCBC as well as a lot of the other banks, including the European banks that came before that. They were essentially banks serving businesses and merchants. So in other words, business banking as we know of it today, right? So back then, I'm just guessing, I think consumer banking wasn't really a big thing yet. Maybe people had money, but they weren't really going to a bank to put their money into the account, I think, back then. And the other thing to note is that they were also quite segmented based on community, right? So I think back then, trust is very important. As you mentioned at the start, bank runs do happen back then.
Yeah.
So, back then, I think you don't have things like MAS or SDIC guaranteeing, your deposits. So you have to obviously bank with a bank that you trust, and that's what people did, and they did it also based on they also segregate it based on their community. So the Chinese or the Hokkiens will bank maybe with the Hokkien community because they know those people as well. Right, so that's the early days of banking, very centered around the Singapore River. The most important thing also is like to know is that back then bank branches were literally the banks themselves. So you didn't necessarily differentiate between the building where the bank is located in and the bank, right?
Yeah, so I think like you mentioned, the bank branches now are all over Singapore, right? So we don't necessarily say, hey, OCBC is only at 65 Chulia Street, right? OCBC is all around Singapore, right? So that's how they probably view it in the past. And for me, when I opened my first bank account when I was 7 or 8, I used to go to the bank every month. So for me,
that's quite often.
Yeah.
Why are you going to the bank every month?
To just deposit my pocket money, and then my parents used to maybe like reward me for depositing my pocket money, and then it's kind of like a
1 for 1.
Yeah. So it encouraged me from a young age to save. So I guess it worked out. Right? No, but for me personally, when I was 7 or 8, the bank still was that one physical bank branch. I didn't go to the other bank branches. Right? That was my bank.
The one that's usually nearest to your house, right?
Correct.
That's how we thought of it.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, my parents used to make that top up. Basically, maybe there was no way to transfer these funds online, so we had to go to that bank branch. Even though my parents had money maybe in their bank account, but for them to transfer it to my bank account, we need to go to the bank branch still. Yeah. They can't do it online. There was no online, right? But today, the bank branch is in everyone's pocket, actually, and if we come here to this bank branch, we don't even have to like line up in the queue anymore. We can sit at the cafe while waiting for our queue numbers. We can read a book while waiting for our queue numbers.
Yeah. You know what it really reminds me of? Like, it just reminds me of going to Changi Airport, actually. Like you're going there, you're waiting for your flight because you obviously don't want to be late and you have to check in early.
Yeah.
But you don't feel the time, you don't feel like you're waiting very long because there's so much things to do.
Yeah.
Right. So even though you might be checking in 1-2 hours earlier, before there is things to eat, books to browse, you can look at things that you maybe have otherwise no time for, to browse books, for example, or to grab a coffee. So it really reminds me of Changi Airport, and I feel like in a way, not all airports are like that as well.
Yes.
Right? There are some airports where 2 hours will feel like 3 hours, right? But not at Changi Airport because there's so many things to do. And I think OCBC Wisma Atria kind of reminds me a little bit of that, when I can imagine someone taking a queue number, hopefully not too long. But if it is, there are things you can do. You can browse some books, you can grab a coffee. I think there's some artworks, and as well as some home appliances, things which you can bring home.
Correct. But the great thing about like being a retail space is that you don't just have to confine yourself to this retail space as well. Like, it's in a shopping mall as well. So that adds to the retail value of coming to a mall to do your banking services as well. I remember when my story, right, when I was 7 or 8, opened a bank account. It was actually in one of those like shops near my home. You couldn't do much around it anyway. You just went there.
And you have to stand inside the bank and wait for your queue number to be called, right?
Now
if you go out and you miss your queue number, that's it.
Yeah.
The good thing is that, the other reason why it reminds me of the airport is because even if you're at a cafe and you're drinking a coffee or something, you can see the queue number from where you're sitting.
Correct.
So you don't have to like stare at the counter at where the bank counter is.
Yeah. And they probably remind you on like SMS nowadays, right? So like just bringing technology together as well.
Yeah. Talking about technology, I think technology also, played a huge role in terms of expanding, the role of a bank, right? So, in the past, if you want to, and in the past, I'm talking about, maybe pre-Independence Day, pre-Singapore Independence Day, when you want to access any banking services, deposit money, withdraw money, transfer money, you have to go into a bank branch, right? So what happened was that with technology, it kind of really expanded the role of what a bank is. I think the main thing it did was it made a bank no longer just a custodian of money, not just a place you go to keep your money safe so that no one will steal it from you, but it actually helped enable people to live their life with the banking services that they now have. So, for example, if you want to save money, yes, of course you go to a bank. But also if you want to pay or you want to invest money, you can do it through a bank. And I think technology itself really helped evolve the role of a bank. So for example, the first ATM machine, we take it for granted today, obviously.
Yes.
Right? But back in the past, ATM machines, this was before the 1980, ATM machine didn't exist. So it's only in the 1980s that OCBC And some other banks also started installing ATM machine so that people can now access their money 24/7 without having to walk in the bank branch and queue up for their turn, right? So I think that's one example. Another example would be Nets, actually. So Nets, if you think about it, it's actually the kind of like the pioneer of cashless transactions in Singapore.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't give it enough credit, or I mean, we take it for granted today. But do you still remember the first time? I still remember the first time my parents used Nets. I mean, like when I can remember, right? So it's like, hey, you don't need to have
money anymore.
But yeah, you don't have to worry that, hey, I only have like, $50 in your purse, but then, you buy groceries, $60, and stuff like that, because, you just have to put your Nets card in, put in your PIN code, and, transaction takes place.
Yeah.
So that's also cashless transaction. And of course, all these things allow the bank to really expand their role beyond just, and basically enabling people to live their life in a better way.
Mm-hmm. And using that banking services at your grocery stores nowadays.
Yeah.
At more places, right? More places.
At your grocery store, and even gyro, right? Where you can now pay your supplier or the vendor without actually having to, physically go to the tuition center and pay them money.
Correct.
So it really allowed banking to go outside of a bank, I think. Obviously, digital banking, our era today, right? So now it's on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, every bank, including OCBC, have your banking app, and with the banking app, you get access to your money anytime you want. You can pay, invest, save, transfer to your friend, and that's a way. I think it's very important to see how banks have evolved, and then it brings us to the question of then how do the bank branches stay relevant today, right? Because now they no longer, need to be the one dispersing cash, helping you to pay your friend, or
Yeah, so I mean, like what we said, right? That bank used to be places that we go only, when we want to make a financial transaction, or an urgent one sometimes, right? Even today, we only find ourselves going to a bank for those reasons, right? But actually, the bank is in our pockets, right? I read an interesting stat from actually the OCBC annual report, which we didn't go through before, so this will be a bit new to you. So I think it was 97% of financial transactions actually happen through digital means today.
Yeah, not surprisingly.
I don't think that stat surprises anyone, but it just shows you the scale. For me, I feel like my bank branch is in my pocket. I just whip out my phone, my bank branch is there. I do 97% of my transactions in there. Maybe the one time I go to the bank branch is to open a bank account for my child. that was maybe my example, my personal example, right? I think like you mentioned also, banks have become very relevant in our everyday lives, right? We don't just whip out our phone for financial transactions, but to buy a hawker meal at a hawker center, pay for our cab rides and go. And even when we forget our wallets, right, we can go to the ATM, get cash out of the ATM.
Yeah, I didn't bring my wallet to the office yesterday and it was fine. But if I didn't have my phone, that would have been a problem for me, for sure.
I think it goes back to that common saying, right? You can lose your wallet, but do not lose your phone.
Yeah.
So banks play like a vital role in also like other parts of our life, not just like the everyday life, but when you travel, we don't just rely on our banks for taking our cash, our Singapore dollars, go to the money changer, but actually we change our money with the bank and store our foreign currencies on the banks today already.
Yeah.
Right, then we can use that card within the same ecosystem, use that same card and pay overseas. And the rates are pretty decent, pretty good as well.
Yeah.
So that whole ecosystem really coming together, I think is what we can see that modern banks, this is the service and value add that they provide.
Yeah, no, I think one thing to note also is that modern banks or banking services today are also like vital, not just for banking services, but also as an enabler for people's life, right? So I think of it a bit like how in the early days of internet, right? This is how I think about it. In the early days of internet, if you use Facebook, then you need a Facebook account, right? And if you don't have a Facebook, or if you don't use Facebook, then you don't need a Facebook account. Same for Google Gmail, right? So if you use Gmail, then you need a Google account as well. But today it's no longer just that, right? Because today, without a Facebook account or a Gmail, you can't access other internet services as well, right? Yeah. So you need a Gmail, you need a Facebook account if you want to say shop on an e-commerce platform, right? Or it gives you convenient access to it.
You need to input your email address.
Correct. And banks are a little bit in the same way, in the sense that today, for example, if I don't have a I mean, everybody have a bank account, right?
Yes.
But in the past, you would think, okay, if I want to keep my money in a bank, then I need a bank account. But today, without a bank account, you would have problems accessing things like PayNow or, GST vouchers that's credited through PayNow to your bank account, right? And you basically are excluded from all these services that, is happening out there,
Correct.
right? Even if you go to a hawker center, you want to use PayNow,
right.
it has to be connected to a bank account, right?
And it's not just like these everyday things either, like the bigger financial plans in your life as well, the bigger financial goals, right? Like investing, right? You can't really invest without
A bank account.
Right? Even if you talk about like platforms out there, you need a bank account still to transfer money to other platforms if you want to invest. Investing even your CPF money, you also need a custodian bank, right? And OCBC is obviously one of the 3 custodian banks for CPF investments, right? So the banks play a major role not only in like the everyday lives nowadays, but in the investment world as well today.
Yeah.
And also read like an interesting statistic. I like to pull up this statistics.
Yeah, go ahead.
I get interested in it, and I hope like the listeners or the viewers out there are interested as well. So in 2004, so 2004, there were 11.5 bank branches per 100,000 adults in Singapore. I don't know how much that is. I could have calculated it, but I didn't. But just based on 100,000 adults, there were 11.5 bank branches. Right. By 2020, this shrank to like 7 bank branches per 100,000 people. And this information is from Trading Economics. We also put like the link in the notes so that people know where we got it from. The other thing to note is that it wasn't just that there were less bank branches per 100,000 people, but in that time between 2004 to 2020, our population went from 4.2 million to about 5.7 million. Right. So we should have had much more bank branches, but instead we had much less.
Yeah. And it's not surprising if you think about it, because with digital banking, the need to really access or walk into a bank branch probably reduces, because most of us can get the things done, at home using our phone or internet banking, right? So,
I mean, personally, I think about it from the bank's perspective, right? If they have less bank branches today, they need to make the most use of their bank branches itself.
That's a good point.
I think, one of another thing that came up during the research was that OCBC is the only bank branch that has Sunday banking still in Singapore. Right?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Sunday maximizing the days as well.
Yeah,
because previously the banks were not open on Sunday.
Yeah, I always thought it was a bit unfortunate that more banks don't open on Sunday, because I always feel like if you want to walk into a bank, typically today, I think chances are you have a transaction or a banking services that is not so straightforward, right? Maybe you want to inquire about a housing loan or some form of investments you are going to make, right? And so you will need a bit more time, and people usually have more time on Sunday, right? When they don't have to work, and they can, afford to go to a bank. So I'm always a bit surprised that more banks don't have Sunday banking, because I always think, if anything, Sunday is a day where you might need to do some stuff.
I think the last point I would say about still having physical branches is you can't run away from the projection, right, of availability, realness, some stability in some form. I know there's a whole range of digital banks in Singapore today, but having a physical presence still like it alludes to some of these things that we treasure sometimes. We may just walk past a branch, we know it's there, we know we can walk in if we ever have a problem, but we likely would not walk in.
What do you think is the best offline-online complement in terms of strategy, right? Because on one hand, we know the local banks, including OCBC, they have bank branch. I don't think the bank branches are going anywhere, even though maybe there'll be a bank or two that closes certain branches, but I don't think they're going anywhere. But what do you think it's the best complement when it comes to, obviously everything is online. So what do you have your physical bank for?
I think we can look at offline, online as like a strategy almost every other businesses have incorporated.
Industries, right? In other industries,
other businesses have incorporated as well, right? So just saying that, I can envision 2 brands, right? One, a very everyday brand like NTUC, we go there, buy our groceries. Also a very physical first store, at least years ago, but now you can buy your groceries online, right? It doesn't mean that we don't go to grocery stores anymore, so we go there for certain reasons, right? What they might be different for each of us. So maybe, personally, I maybe want to go there to grab maybe the fresher fruits, while I can order some of the hard fruits, that the non-perishable ones online. So that's one strategy that's quite good. The other one that even at a higher tier, right, of a brand like Hermes, they have physical stores, but they also have they also have to have like a online presence, right? They can't just ignore that part. So I think for banks, they need to really figure out what they can do with their offline, because online, like 97% of our transactions are already being done online, right? So they need to figure out what this offline strategy could be, right? So I'm not sure what it could be, but I have two main thoughts, right? One is that they need to solve the complex problems that we can't really solve online, right? So what I mean by this, we run into some problems, and then we need to go to the bank branch itself to solve it. So the conversation need to continue from the online. So they need to already know, I mean, this is from my maybe selfish perspective, they need to already know my problems, right? They need to already know that, hey, I wanted to do this and I couldn't do this, and that's why I'm in the bank branch. And then continue that conversation from there rather than restart the whole process, right? That will only waste time. The conversation needs to continue from online to offline, right? I need to come here for a reason, and they also need to know that reason why I'm here. So maybe very appointment-based as well. The other reason is, maybe higher value transactions that require a little bit of thinking, planning, like, planning for retirement, planning to invest, what is suitable for you, what's not suitable. These things cannot really be done online as easily, right? You want to kind of speak to someone sometimes as well. Maybe higher value transactions where you don't really need to speak to someone, but very high value transaction. Like the last time I went to a bank account as well, apart from the story with my kid, is to get a home loan.
Yeah, that's high value. Yeah.
OCBC as well. High value, you could argue that, hey, why can't you get it online?
You could,
really easy.
But if you have question, then it's harder, right?
So you need to walk into the bank branch just so you can ask that question on the spot.
No, I do agree with you. I think like when it comes to advisory related services like investment advice or planning for your future, insurance planning, for example, I think people would just want to be able to talk and ask questions more easily rather than just compare or choose products online. Yeah. So I think bank branches today have to kind of like facilitate that kind of conversation as opposed to just queue in line and wait for your turn with the bank teller, right? So you need a nice place for that, Yeah.
I also have a final thought, like, and this bank branch, OCBC Wisma Atria, actually got me to think about that, right?
Yeah.
Could infusing the retail centricness, I don't know if that's a word, be
more retail focused,
right? More retail centric, be more retail focused. Like what I mean is that cafe out there, right? When we first came in, this was obviously off the camera, right? I met a friend there. He was working there. Yeah. Right. He was doing his work. Maybe he's an OCBC customer as well. He gets some discounts here and there. Maybe he was doing a transaction. I don't know, right? Yeah. But he was working at a cafe and he chose this cafe at OCBC Bank branch.
Yeah. I also feel like it's not really surprising because if you actually come here, it's quite difficult to... You don't really think of it as a bank branch when you go to the cafe, even though the cafe is part of the bank, right? So I think it allows to this more inviting space where people may go to a cafe just to work or actually get a drink or have a meeting without necessarily wanting to go to a bank branch. But then before they know it, they're actually in the bank branch as well, and a bookshop and a bookstore as well. I mean, you can see some books right behind me. There's actually a lot more books as well. So I can see people bring their kids, getting a book here as well, business books, kids books, car books, like so many different kind of books here. And then, just, by coming in here, then they get to, be in a bank branch. Maybe they don't intend to go to a bank branch, but at least, it opens up the space such that it's a less intimidating place for them to be at.
Correct. And not forgetting there's also like an omakase dining experience that you can enjoy here. And I guess
it reminds me of actually when I was in Hong Kong and I realized that actually you were talking about Hermes, right? I think a lot of luxury brands sometimes do have cafe-like concepts because, it kind of opens up the brand to a bit to more people, right? Because, for me, I mean, at least for me, going to a Coach, going to a Coach boutique flagship store, feels like very intimidating because I've opened the door and I don't know if I can afford things there. But I know they have like cafes where it's a lot easier to go in there, grab a drink, and then you start to see and consume
a cup of coffee.
I can afford a cup of coffee, and more importantly for the brand is that I am exposed to their branding. Right, I see their products, and then it might make me think if that's something I want. And I feel like this concept actually facilitates that because, for example, if you pick a book right now, I think if you go to the checkout store, you will realize that if you pay with an OCBC card, you'll get 10 or 15%, or 20% or something like that. So, immediately you might think, hey, maybe I need this card as well, right? So you might not think of applying for a card, but when you're here, and you're making a retail transactions, then you will realize, hey, maybe an OCBC card would be useful.
Yeah, I want to double down on the last point that you make, right? Making the brand a little bit more open to newer audiences, a little bit less daunting to interact with the brand, right? And this information I got from the OCBC annual report, right? So you guys can go there and check it out as well. So OCBC has this digital silvers workshop, right? Digital silvers workshop.
Wow. Okay, what's that?
And this acts as like a pop-up carnival event. So not necessarily in a bank branch, but it's just a carnival event. I think the locations were at some CCs,
Right.
but it's like a pop-up event, for obviously the seniors, digital silvers workshop,
Right.
where seniors can go and learn how to bank easily online, and safely as well. I think with the rising number of scams, they can learn more about that online transactions that they can carry out safely.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, really pushing the bank branch out to the community as opposed to, just being in one location,
Correct.
waiting for people with problems to come in and take a queue number.
Yeah.
It's a very positive experience walking into this bank, because quite often I think when people go into a bank, I think, a lot of times they have problems, which is why they are, they want to meet someone in person to be able to share their challenges with and solve the problem on the spot.
Correct.
Right. But I think one of the difference in terms of the retail experience here is that it's really a retail experience, because you may not necessarily come into this bank branch with a problem, right? You might be looking to do something else, buy a book, get a coffee, have a dinner at the restaurant right in front of me. But at the same time, you're exposed to the bank. So I think that's interesting thought, interesting experience. I can think of something similar as well, actually. And that's actually the pawn shop business, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Right, because pawn shop, in the past, at least when I was growing up, when you were growing up, it just feels like places where
We shouldn't enter, right? It's like, we shouldn't really
unless
enter.
you have a problem.
There's like a big metal grill.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
speak to anyone within the pawn shop.
Yeah, and you just think of going to a pawn shop as, okay, I don't have money, so I need to go in there and maybe sell something of value to get money.
Yeah.
Right. But today's pawn shop is a little bit different, right?
I mean, they look a lot more friendlier, like almost like the jewelry shop, right?
Yeah.
You go in to experience that lifestyle.
Correct,
as well,
correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when you look at a pawn shop today, you don't know it's a pawn shop, traditional pawn shop, because it's more like a jewelry shop, because you see the number of, that gold, watches, handbags as well.
Yeah.
So
and they've also had to like modernize how they thought about as branches, right? I think another example that I can think of right now is also in the hotel industry, right? When you go to some of the higher end hotels, you don't have to check in at the counter itself.
Oh, is that true?
That removal of that physical
Right, so you don't
barrier.
have to go to the counter to check in yourself.
I think it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Right.
I've been to one already myself, right? So I'm enjoying the experience.
Privileged banking, privileged customer here. So what
Privileged
happens?
So you sit back on the sofa, you enjoy your cocktail, and then the wait time gets a bit more bearable as well, so you don't imagine you're standing in line waiting to go into your hotel room, and the wait is like 10 minutes. It'll feel forever.
Right.
But if it's 10 minutes on the sofa, lounging, drinking your cocktail, more bearable, right?
You feel maybe you feel like your hotel experience has already started at the check-in counter.
Exactly.
It's a bit like those people, like, Aaron from the Mount Lion, and when they, when he goes on a flight, right, he doesn't go in the common queue that we go to, right? There is like a different segment for like first class passenger suite. They check in there, it's a great experience there. I mean, I seen the pictures now.
Okay, hopefully I get to experience that soon as well. But I think that's maybe the future of banking, right?
Right.
You want to remove as much as possible that barrier to speaking to someone. You don't want to stand behind the counter and then you're talking to someone on the other side of the counter. So I think using some smart technologies, using the hotel experience as an example, like I'm not standing behind the counter, but I'm also not talking to someone just staring at the screen anymore, right? If I'm at the lounge, sitting on the sofa with my cocktail, that person is coming to me, like, so a lot more personable, a lot more friendly. She's also probably holding like a smart device, like an iPad to check me in.
Yeah.
A lot more friendly as well, I feel, like, rather than, she's just staring behind a desktop and then I'm just telling her my information,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that has to be like one part of the future as well, more friendly, more engaging.
Non-desk transaction, I think. Like not in front of a desk.
Not in front of the desk. I just feel like removing the barrier. Yeah, I'll label it as removing one of the barriers at least.
Right. I mean, it would be great, to just, make, some of the more traditional places we see in other industries just more modernized.
Correct.
So that everything just seems like a more welcoming space that, you can enjoy yourself without feeling like you're just here to make a transaction as soon as you can and get out as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
And I think that nicely concludes our discussion today. For those of you who are watching or listening to this, and if you enjoy the episode, Do remember to follow us on our various social channels. You can follow our Dollars and Cents podcast discussion on YouTube and Spotify. And if you have any thoughts on today's topic, share with us your view.